charity. We've been supporting Kiwis having troubles becoming parents for the last 30 years. We provide a range of services. We've got information available through fertility clinics and our website. We run a Fertility Week program. We have support groups all around the country, and we represent the voice of New Zealanders facing fertility challenges. So we're here for you. Our services are free. We're completely impartial, and we really encourage you to touch base with us and see how we might be able to help you through what is one of life's toughest challenges. If you have any questions at the end of the presentation, please just type them into the chat box, and they'll be answered at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce to you tonight Alice Gormack, who's a dietitian, and she's really known for her work in fertility. Her master's thesis was on New Zealand women undergoing IVF and their diet. So really fascinating stuff, and it's a privilege to have her here tonight to talk to everybody, including the people who are currently in the pilot program of Jumpstart in Auckland and Hamilton. So Alice, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us tonight. I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you, Nicola. Hello, everybody. Welcome. As Nicola said, my name is Alice Gormack, and I'm a dietitian who specialises in fertility and pregnancy. So I've worked as a dietitian for the Fertility Associates since around 2013, and did some research before that, as Nicola alluded to. So in my clinics, I see women and men with a range of fertility issues. So things like endometriosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome. We see women who are overweight or underweight, see women who are pregnant or postnatal, and males for sperm health or just getting healthy overall. So a big range of people. So tonight we're going to talk about the fundamentals of fertility and nutrition. So it seems like quite a simple presentation, but actually if you eat the right food, the nutrients will follow, and you don't need to focus so much on how many grams or milligrams of different nutrients. Just focus on those basics and get them right, because that's the areas that we know that most people don't. Excuse the silly headset. I'm trying to drown out family and dogs and everybody in the background. So what we're going to talk about tonight is general nutrition and lifestyle advice for optimal fertility. Look at nutritional supplements for fertility. Healthy eating for healthy sperm, nutrition and polycystic ovarian syndrome, and nutrition and endometriosis. I assume the presentation will take somewhere around 40 minutes. And as Nicola said, I'm really happy to answer questions after the session. So we'll just leave those to the end mainly. So in terms of making a baby, we've got three main ingredients, and we want to make sure that all of these components for making a baby are as healthy as possible. And this optimizes your chances of natural or assisted conception. Improving your overall health and well-being will help to improve the quality of your eggs as they mature, the readiness of your uterus to carry a baby, and the health of the male sperm. It is a good idea to start making some healthy lifestyle changes around 3 to 4 months ahead of trying for a baby. But if you're already trying and you're thinking, oh, my lifestyle's terrible, don't stress. It's good to make these changes at any point. Excuse me looking over in this direction. I've just got some notes I'm referring to. So fertility and lifestyle. Now we know that lifestyle factors can have a significant effect on fertility. And one of the main ones that most people have heard about now is age. So age is, unfortunately, we can't turn back the clock, but what I've put it at the top here for is if you are trying for a baby and things aren't going well and you're in your 30s, then don't wait too long before you see somebody for help or to investigate. Age affects male and female fertility. We hear lots about female fertility, dropping with age, but there are actually effects of age on males as well. So the main risks of age are things like increased risk of miscarriage, and if the father is older, things like an increased risk of autism or schizophrenia and achondroplasia as well. For smoking is really bad news for fertility and for the health of a pregnancy. So if you can, stop smoking. You also don't qualify for public funding for fertility treatment if you're a female smoker. Smoking increases the rates of miscarriage and decreases the success of IVF treatment. It also can affect sperm production and motility and increase DNA damage. So it's a really good idea to stop it. Same deal with recreational drugs. So if you're a dabbler, then just park that while you're trying for a baby or pregnant. Being moved towards a healthy body weight. So we know that people who are really light, so underweight, or people who are carrying a bit much weight, so might be overweight or obese, these both have negative effects on fertility. We want to be somewhere in that sort of optimal BMI of kind of 18.5 to 25 to be as healthy as possible for carrying a pregnancy and to decrease the risks of carrying a pregnancy. For women with a BMI over 30, it does decrease pregnancy rates, and it can increase the risk of miscarriage and make pregnancy and delivery more complicated. For obese men, it can affect testosterone, which is the main male hormone, and it can increase erectile dysfunction as well. So if you're larger, weight loss is a really good idea. So it doesn't have to be a lot. We know that even 5% of weight loss, 5% of body weight can make a significant difference to your fertility and reproduction. So that means if you're sitting around the 100 kilo mark, it's aiming to lose around 5 kgs over a period of about 6 months would be fine. So we know that if women are larger, if they lose weight, it can restore menstrual cycles if they're irregular. It can also increase the chances of women ovulating and conceiving. Gradual weight loss is much more beneficial. Rapid weight loss is not good for fertility. So exercising regularly is really good as well. That's obviously good for your strength, good for your stress, good for your cardiovascular risk factors too. And doing some outside gives you vitamin D, which is a nutrient thought to be important with fertility too. We don't really get it in our food. We actually make it from sunlight on our skin. Getting enough sleep is important too. If people are short on sleep or working night shifts and things, then it can raise the risk of raise the levels of stress hormones like cortisol in your body. Decreasing exposure to environmental pollutants is something a lot of people trying for a baby have heard of, or people undergoing fertility treatment. These can mimic or block our hormones and affect reproduction in that way. One that a lot of people have heard of now is BPA, bisphenol A, and that's in a lot of plastic products. So when you're choosing, foods and drink bottles and lunch boxes and that sort of thing, look for stuff that is BPA free. And what was I going to say? BPA is one of those ones that's called an endocrine disruptor. So if you can limit it, that is a good idea. For men, ejaculating frequently is a good idea too. Improve that sperm turnover and avoid overheating testes. So things like not sitting with their laptop on their knee, not sitting in really hot spa bath, etc. So this graph here, I just put it in really to illustrate the cumulative effect of negative lifestyle factors. So while one negative lifestyle factor might not have a big impact on the pregnancy rates, having a lot of negative lifestyle factors all adds up. So what we're saying is try and move from having those negative lifestyle factors like smoking and drinking lots of caffeine or being really heavy, that sort of thing. If we can decrease those, every little decrease actually improves your chances of conception and reproduction. So it's a good idea. So while each little one is only a contributor, it can add up to be quite a big effect. So poor lifestyle choices do add up, and make changes to more positive lifestyle habits to push this trend the other way and increase your fertility and pregnancy rates. This graph here just looks at the impact of BMI on female fertility. So BMI is body mass index. So it's a measure of your weight for your height. And there's a lot of places online. I know the National Heart Foundation and Ministry of Health and all these different websites have the calculator on there so that you can work your BMI out if you want to. A BMI that's too low, so at the far left of this graph, or too high at the far right of the graph, you can see it increases the relative risk of infertility. So what we want to do is get somewhere in the middle there. You can see where the lowest bars are on that graph. So 18 through to about 25. So that's the healthy weight range. So the closer we get to that, the better that fertility outcome is really. We do have high BMI in New Zealand. We're one of the biggest populations in the OECD. So the mean BMI in New Zealand is around 27 to 31, depending what group you look at. So even people coming for fertility treatment, we have a lot of people who are above this public funding cutoff. The funding cutoff is BMI of 32 for females. So we have a lot of people way above this. And that's really sad. That's hard. While the public funding cutoff is 32, and that puts a lot of people off. If their BMI is 40 or something, they think, oh, why even bother trying to get my BMI down? You know, I'm never going to qualify for that money. But actually, it's still a great idea to make some improvements to your eating and activity, because even if you lose that 5% of weight, it will still have a significant effect on your overall health and possibly your fertility as well, even if your BMI is still quite high. When we look at alcohol and caffeine, they do more studies all the time, and the ideas sort of go back and forth. But we do think that both of these can have a negative effect on fertility. So caffeine is a hard one to study. It's in so many different foods, and even within the same foods, like if you think about coffee, there's so many different strengths. So the coffee might be anywhere from 50 milligrams of caffeine through to 250 milligrams of caffeine in one cup. So it just depends on strength and all that. So it does make it hard to study. Most studies do show a negative effect of too much caffeine on fertility. And so it's generally recommended that you keep your caffeine intake to around 1 to 200 milligrams per day. And this is about 1 or 2 cups of moderate strength coffee or tea. So people often say, oh, look, I've given up all caffeine while I'm having my fertility treatment. You actually don't need to, as long as you cut it down if you are a high consumer. Also, be mindful of cumulative caffeine sources. So if you're someone who starts the day with a couple of coffees, then you might have a Diet Coke or have an energy drink, and then you have afternoon tea, you might have a chocolate bar or something. There is actually caffeine in all of that, so it does add up. So do be mindful of that. And if you're someone who has 4 coffees a day and you think, oh, I can't give up my coffees, then just slowly decrease and introduce some decaf options so that you slowly get down to like 1 or 2 real coffees and have 1 or 2 decaffeinated options. You can get decaffeinated tea as well. Green tea is one that does contain caffeine that catches a lot of people out. Rooibos is an alternative to green tea. It's a kind of South African red tea that doesn't contain any caffeine. So we think that caffeine may negatively affect people who are having fertility treatment, so assisted conception, and also natural conception as well. Alcohol intake, we definitely recommend decreasing your alcohol intake for overall health, but also for fertility reasons. It's a known teratogen, so that means that it's known to cause defects in human embryos. So definitely, if there's any chance that you could be pregnant, don't be drinking any alcohol at all. We don't know about a safe level in pregnancy. You hear a lot of friends saying, oh, it's only a sip or half a glass or whatever, and your mum often says to you like-minded, oh, I had a glass when I was pregnant with you. The thing is that we know now that it's not safe, and we don't know that there's a safe dose, so why take the risk? We know that having a heavy alcohol intake does reduce fertility, tongue twisted today, and increases the risk of miscarriage too. Over 7 drinks a week for females might be associated with irregular periods and fertility issues, as well as lengthen the time it takes to conceive. And for men, over 20 standard drinks a week reduces the number of pregnancies in their partner. So here's some basic fertility dietary advice. So the main one is that research suggests that following a Mediterranean-style dietary intake increases the chances of conception, and that includes for couples having IVF as well. So Mediterranean-style dietary intake is essentially a bit of seafood and fish and liquid vegetable oils, using legumes and beans, lots of fruit and vegetables, and just cutting down on things like processed foods, too much red meat, high intake of sugary foods and takeaways and sort of treat foods. So the Mediterranean diet is essentially a kind of basic healthy diet without too much processed food. Eating a wide variety of foods helps to feed the good bacteria in our gut and keep us healthy. It also means that we get a really broad range of vitamins and minerals and fiber as well, which is really useful. So a wide variety of foods is actually key to being able to get all the micronutrients that your body needs to function optimally. Increasing antioxidants is really important for fertility as well. So that mainly comes from fruit and vegetables in our diets. So you might have heard, oh, dark chocolate's a great source of antioxidants, but actually you're better to get it from your fruit and vegetables, because the chocolate is also a very good source of sugar and saturated fat, which we don't recommend as much. If you can, wash and peel your vegetables. So a lot of people get quite fixated on how to clean their vegetables when they're having fertility treatment or making sure they're clean enough. You don't need to wash them in bleach or any of this sort of thing. Just give them a really good scrub underwater and dry them with a paper towel. If you can't get the dirt off, then peel them. You've probably all heard of 5+ a day. The recommendations have actually now changed in December, January that we've just had, and it's now 7+ a day for women and 8+ a day for men. And we weren't even meeting 5+ a day. So it's quite lofty to think we're going to get to 7 or 8. Fruit has remained at 2 servings per day, whereas vegetables has gone up to 5 servings a day for women and 6 servings a day for men. And that's just because the vegetables are so good for us and they do contain so much of what we need and nobody gets enough. So do concentrate on increasing your fruit and vegetables. If it's not at your lunch and your dinner, then you're definitely not going to be getting enough vegetables in your day. Increasing dietary fiber is really important as well. And this is that kind of roughage that your grandma talked about. And it does help with bowel function and bowel regularity. But it also helps with cholesterol and hormone control. So fiber has got a lot of other benefits that you don't necessarily know about. Choosing lean animal and plant-based protein sources is important too. So aiming for a kind of protein serve at each meal is good. I don't mean meat. You can actually get protein from things like eggs, chicken, fish, yogurt, nuts, seeds, legumes, dairy products. So when we talk about that Mediterranean-style diet, it actually reduces red meat consumption to about once a week or 2 to 3 times a month in some studies. So that's a lot less than most New Zealanders are used to eating. What you want to do is choose red meat once a week if you are not low in iron. If you are low in iron, then it's something to include a little more often, just because red meat is our best source of iron in our diet. Avoid all processed meat if you can. We know that it's not good for overall health, but it's also not good for fertility. It is high in things like nitrates and sodium. So it's a good idea to try and look at other things you could have instead. So if you're used to things like a ham sandwich or, salami pizza or this sort of thing, switching it to like a smoked salmon sandwich or a tuna or having salmon pizza, something that gives you some good omega-3s instead of those nitrates and sodium is a good swap out. Including healthy fats is really important too. So as I just mentioned, omega-3 is in oily fish and it's very beneficial for fertility and overall health. So that's things like everyone thinks of salmon and they say, oh gosh, it's so expensive. You don't actually need that much to get the recommended amounts of omega-3. So a serving is about the size of a deck of cards. So the fillet they give you at the supermarket is actually able to be 2 servings really. The other sources are things like mussels, tuna, mackerel or sardines. So other oily tinned fish tends to be a lot cheaper than buying actual fresh salmon. For vegetarians who often say, well, I don't eat oily fish and I'm going to miss out on my omega-3, there are some vegetarian sources of omega-3. They're not quite the same. They aren't those really long chain ones, but they are still really beneficial to have. And these are in things like chia seeds, walnuts, flax seeds, and linseeds, edamame beans and hemp seeds. And some people who are vegan might take like an algal-based omega-3 supplement to try and get some of those omega-3s as well. I'll come to that later in the piece. But including healthy fats is really, really important. So oils, nuts and seeds, and spreads, and things like avocado is good as well. People often say nuts and seeds, what ones do you choose? The raw ones are the best. They are the most healthy, and the fat in them doesn't tend to be degraded or anything like that. So the raw ones are the best for your health. Try not to get the ones that are flavored with lots of salt or honey roasted or anything like that. They go from being good for you to not so good for you when they process it like that. And oils, it's anything that's a plant oil that's liquid at room temperature. So you might notice liquid at room temperature would not include things like coconut oil, which is actually high in saturated fat. And despite what all the Instagrammers are telling you, it's actually not particularly good for your health. So decreasing saturated fat is a really good idea for fertility and for overall health. Saturated fat tends to be the one that puts on fat around your tummy, and that's quite hormonally active. It does increase your risk of things like type 2 diabetes, puts cholesterol up and things as well. Saturated fats are fats of animal origin or of coconut origin, so they're the ones to limit. So found in things like butter and meat fat, chicken skin, high-fat dairy products, chips and pastries, biscuits and cream and all that sort of stuff. So cutting those foods down is a good idea. We want to decrease simple carbohydrates as well. Not all carbs are created equal. So definitely carbs are a great food source, but you need to be choosing the ones that are more whole grain. It's got like the bits in them, like the nuts and the seeds, looks a bit more brown. So trying to cut down those really simple carbohydrates that don't have much fiber or anything in them. So I generally say decrease your kind of white flour type products. So things like biscuits and muesli bars and snack bars, processed breakfast cereals. So go back to the old school, plain wheat bix or something like Special K or rolled oats, like your porridge, not the flavoured ones. Those are actually your better cereals to choose. The white bakery kind of foods as well, slices and biscuits and all that sort of thing, just keep to a minimum. Moderate fat dairy products is something that it sounds funny. You'd think, oh, the dietitian, why isn't she telling us to drink trim milk or, low fat dairy products? There's a little bit of fertility research, particularly people who have ovulatory infertility, so they don't ovulate regularly. And someone did a study on this and found that the higher fat dairy products seem to be better. So what I tend to say is, okay, but we also know that the higher fat dairy products have lots of saturated fat in them. So kind of recommend meeting in the middle. So that would be, instead of going for trim milk or full fat milk, you might go somewhere in between with that light blue milk. And having a bit of that kind of reduced fat yogurt, you don't have to go for fat-free products or anything. So just those moderate fat dairy products, while we're still figuring out that research as well, is a good idea. Dairy products are very good for calcium, and most women in New Zealand certainly don't have enough. So aiming for 2.5 servings of dairy products a day is a good idea. Something that I'll just quickly mention is if you go for alternate plant milks, then if you don't want cow's milk, soy is the next best option in terms of nutrition and nutritional completeness. And then further down the ranks is things like almond, rice, or oat milk. Those tend to be a lot lower in protein, and they don't tend to be fortified with calcium. About half the soy milks out there are fortified with calcium, so that is still a really good substitute for cow's milk. If you're lactose intolerant, I generally say go for the zero lacto milk, so the one where they've taken that out, or the fortified soy milk. Making sure to drink enough water is important as well. And with artificial sweeteners and fertility treatment, it's actually a hard one to answer. Basically, let's watch the space a little bit. We think it's fine, but a lot of people get quite distressed about this and think, oh, is it good? Is it not good? Just try not to have too much. And we definitely know that sugar itself is really bad for us, and we know that as a fact. and the artificial sweeteners have been proven safe in many studies, so they are a better alternative to the full sugar products. But if you choose not to use them, that's fine. Just try to wean yourself towards drinking plain water and plain milk. There's some good lifestyle kind of drinks around now as well. Companies that are making kind of no sugar, but also no sweetener, kind of sparkling waters and flavored sort of things like that. So there is a bit more choice than there used to be. So supplements. So I've kind of broken this down into females and males. So on the left, we've got the supplements recommended for females, and on the right, we've got supplements for males. So folic acid is definitely something that's recommended for all females who are trying for a baby. And you want to be having folic acid in either a 0.8 milligram or a 5 milligram dose. So a lot of the ones you get over the counter, which is what OTC stands for, are not actually enough compared to our Ministry of Health recommendations. So take a good look. If you've got folic acid in the cupboard and you just bought it off the shelf in the pharmacy, have a look at that dosage. And if it's only 0.3, then I would recommend taking 3 of them a day, just so that you're getting over that 0.8 milligram recommendation. Who needs 5 milligrams? So that is something that women who've had a previous pregnancy affected by a neural tube defect, or they might be on certain epilepsy medication, or if your BMI is over 30, it's generally recommended that you take a higher dose of folic acid. You don't need methylfolate. Folic acid is actually fine. There's a lot of publicity around people saying you need to take this methylfolate because it's already changed into the form that your body uses. But actually, we know that folic acid is fine and it converts to folate well anyway. There are certain people where this conversion doesn't happen as well. They have a gene deficiency, but they still seem in the studies to still convert enough of the folic acid for it to prevent the neural tube defects. So it's your choice. If you want to take the other folate, you can, but it is usually more expensive and it's not the one available on prescription. I would recommend getting the prescription folic acid just because it's a registered medicine, whereas the over-the-counter nutritional supplements, they're much less regulated. So you don't necessarily know that what the company say on the bottle is what you get. Iodine. So iodine in the dose of 150 micrograms. It's a supplement called NeuroCare that's available on prescription as well. And iodine is really important for brain and eye development of your baby. And we are quite low in iodine in New Zealand. So that's something that you take when you're trying to conceive, or once you know you're pregnant. Usually the doctor will give it to you, and you take it all the way through pregnancy and all the way through breastfeeding as well if you choose to breastfeed. For folic acid, I should have said, folic acid, you take it a month prior to trying for a baby, and you take it for the first trimester of pregnancy. And some supplements, like pregnancy multivitamins that contain folic acid, and women take them the whole way through, it's fine. Folic acid is a water-soluble vitamin, so it actually won't accumulate in your body. So some people choose to take a pregnancy multivitamin, such as Elevate with iodine, or Pregnancy and Breastfeeding Gold, or something like Vital Women's, which are just some examples. The Elevate is about the only pregnancy multivitamin that does contain the folic acid in that 0.8 milligram dose. Some people need an iron or a vitamin B12 supplement, so particularly vitamin B12 for people who might have been vegan for quite a long period of time. B12 actually only comes from animal-sourced products, so you can't actually get it from spirulina or Marmite or any of these sort of sources. It's only absorbed from those kind of animal-based sources like meat and dairy. There are some other supplements where there's interesting studies, but we haven't quite come to any conclusions about whether we should be telling people to take these different supplements and how much is a good idea. So I've put them on there just because I knew I'd get questions about them otherwise. So Coenzyme Q10, we think has a possible role in older women's eggs, and that the doses in studies are around 200 to 600 milligrams a day. Myo-inositol is one that's quite popular in polycystic ovarian syndrome research at the moment, or for people who have poor embryo quality with IVF. And those doses are around 2 to 4 grams per day, sometimes in conjunction with the folic acid as well. Curcumin is like the active component of turmeric. and it's thought to be helpful in an anti-inflammatory kind of mode. So for endometriosis, which is an inflammatory condition, some people are saying, yes, curcumin's a good idea. The trouble with these sort of recommendations you find online is they don't tell you that actually it can have an effect on iron absorption as well. So you've just got to keep a couple of other things in mind. So rather than taking curcumin supplements, I'd say use more turmeric in your cooking and black pepper along with it, because that increases the absorption of the active component by about 2,000%. So the evidence is not clear for omega-3 supplements at this point. If you can eat salmon or oily fish, then that is a much better way to go. But if you don't, you can't stomach it at all, then it's your choice, and you may choose to take an omega-3 supplement. For males, basically there are a couple of multivitamins that some males who have poor sperm motility or concentration take for kind of a mixture of antioxidants and different amino acids and things. These are Minivit and Vitamins, which are sort of a little bit different to each other, but contain mainly the same main compounds. There are some other studies like about specific antioxidants. We've got things studied like zinc and vitamin E and C, certain amino acids like L-carnitine and selenium. But at this stage, it's not worth making a kind of blanket statement, because we don't actually have the evidence to say that that is safe and a good idea. Omega-3 fish oil supplements is similar in males, that we're not clear, so it's personal choice, but if you can, get that from your food intake. I encourage basically everyone to have 1 or 2 Brazil nuts per day as a natural selenium supplement. Don't have more than this because you can actually get selenium toxicity. So in terms of some advice for males, so super sperm advice, increasing exercise and sleep and managing stress is a really good idea. Similar to women, lose weight if you're bigger. Even that 5% is a really good goal to start with. Quit smoking, decrease your alcohol intake, and avoid drugs. And increase those healthy fats. So we know that those poly and monounsaturated fats, which are the ones that come from plant-based fats, are really good for males, really good for sperm. So there have been some really neat studies about studies where they got men to eat sort of 50 or 60 grams of nuts per day, and they had quite great looking results in terms of sperm analysis. So worth a try. So eat nuts daily, and like I said, go for a mixture, including walnuts. They're the only real source of omega-3 in nuts. Most of the other nuts are a different form. So just a mixture of raw nuts in a little pottle is a perfect snack to take to work or have in the car. Decreasing those unhealthy fats, so the saturated fats. Trans fats are not such an issue in New Zealand, but some things like imported American popcorn, that sort of thing, contains some trans fat sometimes. The main thing I'd say for males that I see is they tend to buy lunch more often, from my anecdotal experience. And that's something that you've given the control of what you're eating over to somebody else. Try and make a healthy choice, by all means. If you buy your lunch, try and have something that does have a bit of greenery or salad or vegetable or something with it. But actually packing a lunch from home gives you that control. Whether it's just leftovers or an easy sandwich or something like that would be a really good idea to take. Choosing a range of healthy foods from those 4 food groups. Getting enough folate and zinc. So folate's important for males too. And zinc tends to be in things like fish and seafood and animal proteins. So if you're having a bit of red meat, you're having a bit of chicken, having a bit of fish and seafood, then you should be getting quite a bit of zinc. Do focus on the folate kind of leafy green vegetables as well. Antioxidants are very important for males and sperm health. So choosing foods rich in those vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants is a really good idea. So we know that things like walnuts and citrus fruits, broccoli, garlic, leafy greens, bananas, a little bit of dark chocolate, turmeric, asparagus, oysters, shellfish, all of that list are actually really good foods to include for males for sperm health. And soy products get a really bad rap, especially for males. So actually the average consumption is fine. So if you're someone who likes a bit of tofu or edamame beans, soy milk, that sort of thing, then a moderate intake is fine and should have no effect on your fertility as a male. Sorry, it's always so weird talking into space, not getting any reaction back. So I hope it's not too boring. So polycystic ovarian syndrome. This is something that's really common in women. It affects around 5 to 10% of women of reproductive age. So that's a lot. And it's a condition with multiple cysts on the ovaries. But it's kind of diagnosed like 2 or more of the following. So it's irregular periods or some mini follicles in your ovaries. Could be increased hair growth or acne, or increased levels of male hormones. So there's kind of varying things that they use to diagnose it. It does affect your hormones, and it does increase your risk of metabolic disease if you don't treat it. So the main problem with PCOS, as we call it for short, polycystic ovarian syndrome, is insulin resistance. So even for women who are in that healthy weight range, if they have PCOS, they are more likely to have insulin resistance too, which raises your kind of cardiovascular risk factors and things. So it is worth trying some things to get that insulin resistance down to improve your body's response to your insulin. It is a common cause of infertility. It does tend to affect ovulation. And we can manage PCOS, but we can't cure PCOS. And the main way that we manage it is lifestyle and nutritional changes, and often plus or minus a medication as well, such as metformin is a common one. For overweight women with PCOS, weight loss and exercise are really important. It decreases that male hormone production, it improves your insulin sensitivity, and it reduces your metabolic risk as well. So reduces your risk of type 2 diabetes, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, etc. So if you are of fairly slim build and you have been diagnosed with PCOS, the main thing to do is keep your weight stable. Don't let it creep up over the years. So try and just focus on keeping it in that healthy weight range, because that helps to keep the PCOS under control. If you are larger and you have PCOS, then it's making those healthy food changes and increasing your exercise to help lose that bit of weight that will help to improve that way that your insulin works. I'm just trying to see where I've... Yeah. We do know there are some recommendations for exercise for PCOS that are really important to know as well. So if you're trying to lose weight and you have polycystic ovarian syndrome, it's recommended that you get about 4 hours a week of moderate intensity exercise, so around 250 minutes a week, plus a couple of days of weight lifting and aiming for 10,000 steps per day. So it is quite a lot of exercise to help get that weight down. For people who are just trying to prevent weight gain or keep their weight stable, it's a recommendation of about 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity exercise, plus again the 2 days of strength-based training and aiming for 10,000 steps per day. So you can see that exercise is a really, really important component of looking after polycystic ovarian syndrome. I've got a question here. I'm currently working on getting my HbA1c levels down with help from my fertility doctor. How much sugar is okay to have in a day? Watermelon and grapes are fine to eat. So fruit, actually, people say, oh, it's really high in sugar, but it is diluted out with quite a lot of water content and fiber as well. So just keep your serving size kind of moderate, like a handful of grapes, it's fine, that's a serving, or, you know, one decent kind of slice of watermelon, that should be fine. Working on getting your HbA1c levels down is really important, because HbA1c is kind of a measure of your blood glucose control over a period of time, over about the last 3 or 4 months. And it gives us an idea whether your blood glucose control is in the normal range, whether it might be in the pre-diabetic range, or whether it's showing that you have type 2 diabetes. So when you have PCOS, it is important to get that HbA1c level checked occasionally. So it's a really good idea to work on getting that down. And the same way to get it down is what we've just talked about. So it's increasing that exercise right up to that kind of 4 hours or more a week, plus regular walking, trying not to sit for long periods during the day. How much sugar is it okay to have in a day is a hard question. What I would recommend is just keeping sugary foods to a minimum. So if you're looking to control your blood glucose better, not having sugary drinks is a really good start. And in terms of how much sugar is it okay to have in a day is a hard one too, because we actually produce sugar from the digestion of carbohydrate. With polycystic ovarian syndrome, you want to have a serving of carbohydrate after cooking that's probably about the size of your clenched fist or less, so at your lunch or dinner. So it might be, 1 or 2 bits of bread at lunch, or a small sort of bun, or it might be like a smallish cooked potato with your dinner. Are there specialists to support people with PCOS? Yes, there are organisations who support people with polycystic ovarian syndrome, like community groups and things. But mainly your GP is the person who will help to keep an eye on it and give you those recommendations. But seeing someone, like I see a lot of women with PCOS, and help to work on those nutritional and lifestyle changes. And I know a lot of other dietitians and nutritionists do as well. So if you feel like you need that extra help, that's who I would recommend to go and see. I'm just still thinking about how much sugar is okay to have. If you're adding sugar into things like hot drinks and stuff, really try and cut that out or cut that down, because that's just additional sugar that you don't need, that will raise those blood glucose levels. So try not to have sugary products, really. Get your main sugary taste from things like fruit. So the nutritional management of polycystic ovarian syndrome, there's a big group who met and released some international guidelines in 2018. And they said that actually no one diet is better than the other. So anything that helps people to actually lose some weight if they're bigger with PCOS is really helpful. And basically whatever works for people, do it, because it's the weight loss itself that improves your health. So it's not about whether you followed a low carb diet or a high protein diet or a low fat diet. As long as you followed something, made some changes that allowed your calorie intake to go down and helped you to lose the weight, then that improves the polycystic ovarian syndrome. Obviously, reducing saturated fat and keeping that quite low is a good idea, because people with PCOS are more at risk of things like type 2 diabetes. So I would say don't try and necessarily follow something like a keto diet where the saturated fat intake might be really high. It is those basic nutritional principles that we talked about earlier, so that wide variety, lots of fruit and vegetables, that sort of thing. Losing that little bit of weight, so coming back to that 5% yet again. I just talked about reducing the saturated fat intake, so helping to lower your insulin resistance. Having loads of colourful vegetables. They're not the kind of carby vegetables, so not so much going crazy on the potato and kumara and that sort of thing, but having lots of the colourful ones, so like your green and orange, yellows, capsicums and zucchinis and all that sort of thing. That's a good idea. 2 or 3 servings of fruit per day. So like I said, it's a common thing for women with PCOS to say, right, fruit's got sugar, I'm cutting it out. You definitely don't need to. I would say choose the fruit over something else that you might be having instead, like a snack bar or chocolate, or something that does actually contain sugar. Cutting out those treat foods as much as possible as well. So if you're someone who likes having a fair bit of chocolate in the evening, buying the kind of multi-pack ones and just having the little 2 square kind of equivalent of chocolate is a much better idea. So it's portion control. So how much of that food are you having and how often are you having it? That makes the biggest difference to your weight. So carbohydrates are important, like I said, but you want to choose the right ones. So the ones that digest down into sugar in your body slowly and don't bump your blood sugar up high and then let it drop down again. You want the ones that have a slow release to keep you full and to give you that fiber intake as well. Some people suggest you don't need to cut out dairy or gluten as beneficial for polycystic ovarian syndrome. No. Dairy products are actually really important to include. That's not something that I would recommend cutting out. And gluten, I'd only recommend cutting that out if you have a risk, if you've been diagnosed with celiac disease, or if you're trying a low Fodmap diet, but that tends to be more for people with irritable bowel syndrome or endometriosis, which I'm coming to in a moment. Be careful with your carb portions. So about the size of your fist, like I said before, is a good amount. And if you're extra hungry, if that's a big decrease for you, then put lots more veggies on your plate. Spread your carbohydrate out evenly as well between your meals, because that helps your blood glucose control, and it helps what insulin you have to work better. So endometriosis is a common inflammatory condition that affects about 1 in 10 New Zealand women. And there's 5 stages through from mild to severe. And the fertility is most affected by moderate to severe endometriosis. We don't know what causes it, and we don't have a way to fix it. It tends to be, from a dietary perspective, we think that having a more anti-inflammatory intake is helpful. So anti-inflammatory dietary intake is lots of fruit and vegetables, some of those whole grain carbohydrates, and having a high fiber intake may help to control estrogen levels. Increase those omega-3 fats, so those oily fish, because those are very anti-inflammatory. We know that processed food and red meat are pro-inflammatory, so it's reducing those down. Reducing caffeine and alcohol as well. These can affect estrogen levels. And we think that soy products might be beneficial for endometriosis. So again, if you Google it, you'd probably find people say, oh no, you'd never have phytoestrogens, which is in soy, when you have endometriosis. But actually it's thought that it has no real effect, or if anything, it's actually beneficial for endometriosis to eat those foods. Fodmaps is something that's come around in about the last 5 to 10 years, I guess. I can see, sorry, another question. Yes, brown or purple rice probably are better than white rice. They will tend to be higher in fibre, and they're often a lower GI as well, which means they digest more slowly. So white rice is fine too if you're controlling the portion of it as well. So whatever rice you choose, don't choose more than about probably 3/4 of a metric cup once it's cooked. Depending on what you already do. So there is common overlap between endometriosis and irritable bowel syndrome. So Fodmaps is a collection of short-chain carbohydrates, and carbohydrates are kind of otherwise known as sugars. So it's not sugar, it's sugars. So Fodmaps stands for fermentable oligo, monosaccharides, and polyols. And what these are is they are a collection of short-chain carbohydrates that are not absorbed properly in the gut. And for some people, these can trigger irritable bowel symptoms. So things like bloating and constipation or diarrhea or stomach pain. And endometriosis and irritable bowel actually seem to go together a lot. It's about 70% of people who have endometriosis also have irritable bowel syndrome. So there was a New Zealand study that showed that a low FODMAP diet reduced symptoms in a lot of women who had endometriosis and irritable bowel syndrome together. So if you are someone who has endo and you also have bowel issues, then the low FODMAP diet could be worth a try. It is quite complex, and it is kind of a 3-stage process. And so I would recommend doing it under dietitian supervision and a dietitian who's been trained in FODMAPs as well. So what you tend to do is like an elimination diet, where you go on a low FODMAP diet for 2 to 6 weeks, and then you do a testing phase where you introduce each of these FODMAPs back in one at a time and test your tolerance to different portion amounts. And then at the end, you kind of work out which ones you tolerate and which ones you don't. And that will let you kind of go on from there, having as wide a variety of food as possible, but also limiting those things that you know sets you off. A low FODMAP diet is not something that you should just follow long term. So yes, you can Google it and you'll be able to find information on what a low FODMAP diet is, but actually it's not something that we recommend that you follow for long term. It's only for the elimination phase, because a lot of foods that are high in FODMAPs are actually really good for us and contain nutrients that we do need. Metamucil is good. Yes, Metamucil is basically psyllium husk, which is a type of fibre. And it's a soluble fibre, so it's really gentle and it absorbs water. So if you're someone who suffers with either constipation or diarrhea, it can actually be quite helpful for both. So yep, Metamucil is a good choice. And the cheaper option is just to get psyllium husk and throw a bit of that in your cereal or a smoothie. Be fine. Does help reduce cholesterol and things too. So the main take-home advice is to work on the basic, simple stuff, choosing a nutritional intake that's mainly unprocessed foods, foods in their kind of natural state. Don't worry about kind of how many grams of something, or if it has gluten, or if you need to sprout it, or this sort of stuff. It's more making sure that you're ticking off those main food groups and not having too much of the kind of extra treat foods. Going Mediterranean is really helpful for fertility for males and females. It's also great for heart health and quite good for the environment. I would recommend, and I do this with everyone who comes to see me, is to make 2 or 3 simple food goals. Stick them on your fridge, or keep them somewhere handy so that you can work towards those, and write down a list of how you're going to do that. It could be something really simple. I'm going to have 2 fruits a day, or I'm going to take mixed nuts in a pottle for morning tea. I might have vegetables in my lunch meal every day of some kind. And that doesn't need to be anything fancy. If you've seen my lunches, it's often half a pack of cherry tomatoes or a chunk of cucumber that I can cut up at work. So it doesn't have to be a full-on salad. If you are going to a cafe regularly, maybe you choose that you'll just have a coffee and that you won't have something sweet along with it. And trying a vegetarian meal a week is quite a popular one lately. Cutting down on the unhealthy stuff, so those too much of the treat foods, too much alcohol, too much caffeine, so just reducing those. Be active in some way every single day, so limiting your time in front of a computer and the time spent sitting on your bottom. We know that being sedentary is really unhealthy for us, so get up, move around even when you're at work, and make sure to do some extra exercise after work too. Take evidence-based nutritional supplements only. There is a heck of a lot of stuff when you go into a pharmacy. So definitely consult somebody who knows what they're talking about in terms of nutritional supplements for planning a pregnancy, or if you're pregnant, because there are some that are actually not recommended. They're in the Food Safety for Pregnancy booklet. They do have a list at the back of things like teas that wouldn't be recommended in pregnancy and stuff too, which some people find quite helpful. So many people nowadays have sore stomachs and digestive issues and bloating and constipation. Just have to look really hard at your lifestyle. Often we do have a poor diet and a stressful sedentary job. Not getting enough exercise and sleep can be inadequate. There's all sorts of things. Humans are designed that we don't sit all day, and that we eat mainly unprocessed plant foods, and that we are active all day long, and that we go to bed when the sun sets. So try and head more towards that sort of pattern if you can, limiting those things from modern day life that we know are actually making our health worse. People can book a dietitian without referrals from anybody. Sometimes if you have health insurance, you might want a referral from somebody to be able to claim back your health insurance. But some health insurance plans, you don't need a referral from anybody to make that claim. The cost range is anywhere from, I think, about 150, 160 through to about 240 or something for a 1-hour new patient appointment. So it's anywhere in that ballpark, I guess. Yeah, but often people will need one initial consultation and one follow-up, and then they're good to go. Yeah. Intermittent fasting, yes, 16. Yep, I think those sort of things, if it's helping you to prevent getting overweight, or it's helping you to bring your weight down, then doing things like the intermittent fasting can be okay. Just make sure that you are getting the recommended servings of those food groups, because sometimes if you're really limiting your eating window, there's actually not enough time to get all the nutrients that your body requires. So just be careful when you do eat to make it really good quality. So that would be my main warning there. Some people find it helpful for controlling weight, or they might say, well, I'm just going to make a rule, I'm not going to eat after 7:30 p.m. because after dinner I tend to just eat stuff that's not that great for me. Any food to avoid after embryo transfer? No, not really. I have a lot of women who eat as if they're pregnant. They're sort of pregnant until confirmed otherwise, I guess. So they are following all the food safety recommendations and all this sort of thing. You don't need to, like, until that a pregnancy is confirmed. I think you can be, I mean, it's already stressful enough after embryo transfer. I think just take it easy and don't be too hard on yourself, and eat lots of fruit and vegetables and a pretty good basic diet. Go for some walks to help stress relief as well. Be a good idea. But definitely don't drink any alcohol. So I think this quote is one that I often like finishing on, because it's just really simple, but it kind of sums it all up. So eat food, not too much, and mostly plants. And don't eat anything that your great-grandmother wouldn't recognize as food. So it's saying, cut down on that processed stuff again. So we've got time for one or two more questions. So see what comes through.
That may be it for questions tonight, I think, by the look of it. So on behalf of everybody who attended tonight and Fertility New Zealand, thank you so much, Alice, for your time tonight and sharing your really practical and useful advice. I'm sure everybody's taken something home from it. So thank you, everybody, for taking the time out of your evening, and thank you again, Alice.
Cheers. Good luck, everybody.
Paul Marie. Good night.
Good night.